Last time on Zero to Hero, our boy Syl hit level 80 and got a barrage of new content to go do. With garbage gear, will he be able to get his gear that makes sense so the story missions don't take 2 hours to complete? Find out that and much more on this episode of Zero to Hero. So at the last episode, I finally made it to level 80 and I completed the first section of the Soto story. I basically had like 18 things that I wanted to get done, so I had some decent quality of life and I was able to do the content that I'm most familiar with to start actually getting gold. And the only real avenue that I had for making any consistent gold in this game was like open world meta events in core areas, Dragonstorm, and like gathering materials, which is basically like the lowest tier of gold making in this game. I had about 6 gold and I wanted to get my build to as close to completely optimized as possible. I actually did a standalone build guide for the build that I'm shooting for, so I won't be going over that here. However, the main component that makes this build and most Mesmer builds work is getting to crit cap, which means getting assassin stats or precision modifiers, which don't really exist. You only really have food. This is a challenge even with more resources, but if you want something to do the math for you, there is actually a community resource exactly for that purpose, and I did use it to try to figure out a way to make this build work. Guild Wars 2 skills.net is basically a theory crafting site, and most people have seen it. A lot of build guides use these to tell you the build to run, and you can actually load up different exotic or ascended stat sets so you can make alterations before you start swapping your gear or buying new equipment in game. I use this site to try to see if exotic assassin's gear would get me to where I needed to be, only to realize that assassin exotics are significantly more expensive than berserker sets. Since berserkers was really the only gear I could afford, I figured it was better than nothing, and instead I'll be focusing on getting the proper gear setup with the ascended set, which I do get 3 pieces of ascended armor from the Wizard's Vault, so I really only need to worry about getting the ascended gear from the game, if that makes sense. I did unlock the Chronomancer specialization. I actually joined a hero point train for this. I did run into a viewer, which is cool, so shout out to this guy. Thanks for keeping my secret. And also shout out to the commanders that do these hero point trains, because it is not lucrative to do hero point trains, but it helps the community out so much. So shout out to these guys as well. Speaking of the Wizard's Vault, I know I mentioned a couple times that I am prioritizing the Wizard's Vault daily and weekly in the last episode. However, now that we are max level and kind of sort of have a meta build, even though the gear is still kind of jank, I am definitely focusing on these special achievements now, especially the time limited items like the April Fool's stuff, and we will be revisiting Heart of Thorns this coming week, and I'm sure that there's going to be a Wizard's Vault bonus for that. Beyond that, I'm trying to get through the Soto story because a few of these are reliant on completing achievements in the most recent content release. So tier 1 Artisan of Arms requires an achievement later on in the story, and that gives you 300 astral claim. The Nadra Surrounds Savior achievement is 300 astral claim, and it's in the Inner Nio's second half meta. The Eventide's March is the final chapter of the current story step, and that's 500 astral claim. So while I'm doing other things, I'm working towards completing the Soto story, primarily so that way I can get to these special achievements in the Wizard's Vault. Now that I have gear, I'm actually able to do strikes and fractals, with tier 1 fractals being the only ones that are really available to me. However, I am prioritizing them. I don't really have video of it right now, but I'm at, I think, personal level 11, and I was just doing the dailies. Eventually, after I get my ascended gear and enough agony resistance, I might actually just make my own group and climb them in order, but for right now that's not really necessary. The Wizard's Vault has a gold mine of items that can help this account get funded, so I just need the wizard coins. Like, give me the wizard coins. But after I milk the Wizard's Vault for all it's worth, I'm definitely going to be focusing on key mastery lines and exploration. Still exploration. There are basically 4 key areas that every player should try to unlock on their character. For you can just teleport to a friend, but they're the Wizard's Tower for strike missions, Eye of the North for strike missions, and Arborstone for strike missions. Arborstone is arguably the best of the three because it actually gives you access to antique summoning stones, EOD strikes, which give you weekly raw gold, and you have the ambergris fish trader guy, so that'll help when we're building out our Gen 3 legendary. And with that, I also want to talk briefly about the prioritization of mastery lines. Looking at the masteries, there are definitely ones that are better than others. For Soto, the only one that really matters is the sky scale one. The legendary crafting one is kind of pointless at this point. I'll eventually complete the track, but it's like super low priority. For Icebrood Saga, pretty much all of the open this color chest mastery lines are important since it makes IBS strikes way more valuable. For Heart of Thorns, the gliding track, specifically leyline gliding and bouncy mushrooms, are the two that are most important to me. The rest are more or less just built into the story, so that way it time gates it. Getting provisioner tokens or something like that is not that important right now. Ancient Magics is by far the most useless one since it's only for flavor in Living World Season 3. And while they do have some decent items in Season 3, Season 4 will be my primary focus with the volatile magic instead of the unbound magic. And just briefly to recap what I actually did this week, I unlocked the Wizard's Tower through Soto, which was kind of boring to be honest. There were 2 sets of farming rifts in the first part of the story that I forgot about, and if you've watched any of my other content, you know that I'm not a fan. I got my gear set up so I can do strikes and fractals, and I actually did revisit World vs. World for about an hour, which is something I don't really like to do, but I am going to need Gift of Battles, like a lot of Gift of Battles at some point. So doing it in small stints is nice. And I'm going to be incorporating SPVP as well. PvP and World vs. World currencies are very nice to have. So even if you aren't super into those game mode, it's good to get a match in, slowly work towards the league tracks or the World vs. World tracks, so you have some of those currencies available. At this point, I'm comfortably banking up gold since I have some content that actually rewards raw gold and I can sell everything else. Outside of Agony Infusions, my primary target is to get a commander's tag. Once I get that, I will no longer be limited by the LFG and I will be able to start raiding and be more task focused on objectives and metas that I need for this account because I'll just be able to tag up and do them. So that is my primary focus. And before I get into comments, I'd like to see what you guys think on a few things. So I have some questions about this adventure that maybe you could help me decide on the direction. Drop a comment with your vote. I might also put out a poll on my community tab for you guys to vote on. But first thing, should I get the sky scale using the Soto method or the Living World Season 4 method? And secondly, what do you personally consider being at the hero? Like, I know we're doing a 0 to hero, but what does that mean? Is it max masteries? Is it full legendary? Is it a couple of legendaries? Is it completing the story? Like, what do you consider beating the game? What is the hero? Like, where do we stop? I want to know what you think. So with those in mind, let's get into some comments from last episode. So make sure you drop any questions you have, even if they aren't in response to the ones that I just posed. So Moonhey1 dropped some tips about playing Berserker power builds and to start with, and then getting into Condi or healing builds. And frankly, this is great advice. It's advice that I've given in the past. Once you get your initial build together, you can really easily get other builds geared up from drops from in-game content. So I fully intend on gearing my account up from like the Wizard's Vault and in-game drops from fractals and raids and strikes, and then the alternate builds that I go with will just be fully geared with drops. In fact, I couldn't even really get Assassin's gear initially, so I had to start with Berserker everything, and it works pretty well. My DPS is way lower than it should be, but nobody's really going to be complaining about boon support doing like 15k DPS, or at least they haven't yet. Marikai wants to know my thoughts on legendary gearing. First things first, congrats on getting to this point. I was at that point a few years ago, and I'm still flushing out some loose ends on my main account. I mostly have the double weapons like mace and pistol that I need a second of. I think I'm only missing those two, but then I'll be able able to gear up any build with just stuff from the legendary armory. So when we are talking about efficiency with legendary gearing, I personally think that raid legendary armor and Gen 3 weapons are the most efficient outside of the legendary starter kit boxes from the Wizard's Vault. The best way to get legendaries is through the use of Mystic Coin to Mystic Clover vendors, which the least intrusive ones are the ones from fractals and raids, since those content types give you enough gold that you can essentially just buy the extra mats you need for the conversions each week. So you never really run out of clovers. And for the key components, you do raids each week for the LI, you do strikes for Eternal Ice that you then convert into materials, and then you do fractals and raids for the conversion of coins into clovers. You also are going to have to do world versus world for gifts of battle. It's the one thing that keeps PvE players going. I personally feel like SPVP and world versus world have kind of an easy time with their legendary armor, but it is very time gated through the way that their reward tracks and their pip systems work. Like, there's very limited ways to speed that up, and I guess in a sense raids are time gated by LI, but you get so many each week and you get other materials and drops and resources, so you get there a lot faster, it feels. Especially if you're only doing the first collection and you only need that 150 LI and the achievements, you get 2 sets of ascended armor while you're completing those achievements. And the hardest time gate on PvE legendaries is the provisioner tokens, which right now there's more ways to get them than ever before. You have raid challenge modes, you have Heart of Thorns vendors, you have Soto vendors for various costs. I personally just slow roll them with the Obsidian Shard guy in the Black Citadel. So if you don't mind being patient, you can get them all just from him alone if you wanted. And if you're interested in making Gen 1 legendaries, I did do a breakdown of my technique on the video of Get to Endgame Fast. I've shouted out that video a couple of times over the last few months when talking about creating legendaries. It's a little bit dated in terms of my upload history, but the information is still accurate. And I'm kind of sort of actually following that guide for this 0 to hero run, at least on how I intend to fund the account. Zeg Monkey noticed that I had changed Wizard's Vault dailies to just put PvE. And yeah, you could swap your dailies out. There is a little gear next to the dailies tab that you can click on and shift it to any game mode you want. If you're just getting tired of PvE, or you're more into world versus world now, or more into PvP, you can just switch them. And I believe it only switches the week by week. So if you are midweek, your weeklies will stay the same until the next reset, but your dailies will shift from day to day. I'm glad that helped out. I wasn't intending it, but I'm glad it helped. Steve mentioned that there's a long road for new players, and yeah, man, I agree so hard. I had no idea it was going to be like this, since all of these updates and masteries were like trickle fed to me with months to complete. So now on a fresh account, I'm like staring down the road of 500 plus mastery points and effects that haven't been locked out for me for years. And it's kind of cool to re-experience the game at that level, since I've been so distanced from it, but some things feel pretty dumb at the same time. You brought up auto loot, and I think auto loot as a mastery is bad. It's so dumb. Like, imagine they implemented these recent post-processing changes to the game, but they put them behind like some mastery line about how, oh, you have super eyeballs now, so you could see past all this bloom in the game. And then you can't enable it without doing an in-game mastery line. Like, that's how I feel about auto loot. It's literally in the settings. Like, if you open up F11, it is locked out, which I find to be like, what's the corporate word for it? An interesting design decision. And with that, I want to thank everybody who wrote a comment in support of the series or shared your thoughts. I make content to primarily interact with the community, so a big shout out to you guys who are dropping comments. Additionally, I want to thank all of my subscribers. I have some big things planned for this channel to give back to all of you guys here soon, and I promise it's going to be cool. So if you want to get in on that, please consider subscribing. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you on episode 4. Peace.